Okay, so now actually we have added this HUD instance to our game in the previous tutorial, and it is updating on real time, right? So now we can add a feature like maybe like dynamically equipping weapon from the level, right? So here you can see like currently we are just equipping and unequipping the weapons based on whatever the current weapons that we have in our weapon inventory. Similarly, we can have sort of a mechanism instead of manually adding these weapons by default to our character. We can have sort of like a feature to equip the weapons from the ground, right? Or the picking weapon from the ground. And similarly, maybe like drop in the weapon. Okay, so today let's see how we can do that. Right. So first, I will go to the TPS game directory and create a new folder called inventory, right? Actually, later on we can add multiple different inventory items, but for now let's focus on the weapon instances. Right. So the inventory, let's create another folder called maybe blueprints, and there let's create another folder called base, and there let's create an actor called BP. Pickable item base, right? So whatever the items that can be picked or dropped will be inherited through this class, which is BP pickable item base. So I'll open that thing and I'll close the rest of the tabs actually, otherwise the UI seems a bit cluttered. Okay, so for the BP pickable item base, let's add a scene first, right? And inside this scene, I'll add a static mesh to visualize whatever the item that I'm picking. And also let's add a spear collision as well, right? Because that spear collision will be used to detect whether a specific character is going to pick the item or not. So I'll add a spear collision to the default scene root, and by default it has 32 radius, which would be fine, I guess. Right. And now let's add multiple different variables to configure this specific instance, right? So to do that, first I will create a structure and we can update it accordingly. So let's go to the structs and I'll create a new folder called inventory. And there, let's create a new blueprint structure called S pickable item. And I'll open that up. And as these structural fields, first we need a preview mesh, right? So I'll add a field called preview mesh, and this should be a static mesh because we are not going to animate our instance that we are picking. We just need a placeholder icon to show whatever the item that we are going to pick, right? So I'll add a preview mesh static mesh instance, and we should be able to actually maybe later on to tweak its size or maybe rotation and things like that. Therefore I'll add another record called preview mesh transform. Is the type of transform, so we have the ability to override whatever the values that we want later on, right? And then I need a way to actually configure the spear collision radius as well, because maybe based on the item size that we are going to pick, this radius should be able to dynamically adjustable. Therefore, I'll add another field called interaction range radius, which is a float value. And finally, we need whatever the inventory item that we pick, right? So let's add a new field called inventory item. This should be the type of actor, but make sure its type is class reference, not the object reference. It should be the class reference, because we are going to dynamically spawn whatever the actor that we are going to pick on runtime, right? So it should be an actor, right? So as the default values, maybe I can keep everything as it is. Except I will give the interaction radius as 48, right? I think it's a better value for the collision sphere radius, so I'll just say give it as a 48. The rest of the stuffs I can keep empty as it is. And let's go back to the pickable item base, and let's add that instance here. So I'll add a variable called pickable item config, and let's rename this as pickable item config. It's more meaningful. And as the type, it should be the pickable item config. And make sure to make it as public, and let's add it to setup category. Okay, now if I click this instance, I have the ability to tweak whatever the value I want, right? Okay, so maybe as the preview mesh, let's add our chamfer instance. So this is actually comes with TPS game essentials package, and inside there actually the level prototype images, we have this chamfer cube. So just for reference, I'll add it, but here you can see nothing is updating because we haven't actually implemented any logic to be initialized this specific static mesh. So to do that, let's create a new function called maybe initialize. Sorry, this has a type. Initialize. Okay. And there, let's get our pickable item config reference, break it, and let's get this instance, and let's add, or let's call set static mesh function. I'll get to here, and as the preview mesh, I'll use this one. And since we have this preview mesh transform a variable as well, let's add it to here. So let's make its relative transform as this one. Compile and save, and let's go to the construction script, and let's call this initialize function. And if I go to the viewport now you can see that our element is being visualized. Our static mesh has been here, right? But I think the size is too much large, so let's maybe reduce its scale further. So I think 0.3, 0.3 and 0.3 would be fine, right? It's a nice little cube like this. Okay, now what? Now we have remaining this range radius as well, but first let's add an instance to our level and see how it works. Okay, so if I add an instance here, now you can see actually it's being deployed, but by default it's sort of overlapping with the ground, right? So we can actually push it like this upward inside the level, that would be fine. But the issue is actually if we spawn another instance in the level, we have to add the same offset to there as well, right? So this is a bit of a hassle, like when you are dealing with multiple different items. So therefore, instead of adding sort of a world offset, let's go to our instance itself, and I'll add a offset to our location here. So I think 70 would be fine. So you can see our cube is lifted from the ground or from the root now, right? But you can see like only the static mesh has been lifted, not this spear, because we haven't actually attached this spear to this specific scene. So let's attach it, and I'll make it 0. So it is now on the correct position. Okay. Right. Now, if we go to the level, and if I try to place it in the level, here you can see by default it has the offset, right? If I play it, now our elements are there. But actually our character is colliding with the static mesh, which is not ideally what we want. We need it sort of like overlap with the character. Otherwise we can't actually pick it by going through it, right? So to do that, actually it's quite simple. Let's go to the static mesh, and instead of having the collision preset as block called dynamics, I'll make it as no collision. And now if I play it, you can see our character is overlapping with the pickable item objects. Okay. Now we need a way to actually determine a specific collision or a specific event trigger where the character is overlapping with this specific object. So to do that, actually we can go to this sphere object box collision. Actually it's a sphere collision, and here we have these two events that can be useful. The first one is actually begin overlap, and the second one is end overlap. Begin overlap is basically to sense the first initiation or the first collision with the trigger, and the end overlap is basically the last collision of the trigger, right? But actually having the first collision response would be fine. So I'll use this begin overlap function, and just for testing I'll print string, and as the string I will use the self reference, so we can simply print the instance name there, right? Okay, now you can see actually our character is colliding with the elements, and it looks nice. Okay, right. So just for the debugging purposes, let's visualize this sphere collision on the level. So I'll make this hidden in game as false, so you'll be able to see the collision sphere as well, right? So currently I think it has the 32 radius by default, but since we have this interaction range radius, let's add it to our initialization as well. So here here what we can do is I'll comment this stuff for maybe like preview mesh, and I'll add a sequence here, and as the second pin let's get this sphere and set sphere radius as this interaction range radius. Compile and save, and if I go to the editor, now you can see the sphere radius has been increased, right? I can test it at the runtime as well. You can see the radius is now a bit enlarged, which means actually we have a better range of collision. Okay, right. Now I think yeah, almost done. So the remaining part is actually how to spawn this specific inventory item, and let's say for a weapon or whatever the item that you are equipping, and we need a way to actually add that weapon to our weapon system. So since it is sort of like a separate part, I will cover it in the next tutorial. See you there.